The small voice cut through the noise of the crowded community center like a knife through silence, stopping Caitlin Clark mid-sentence as she turned to see a 7-year-old girl with braided hair and worn sneakers looking up at her with eyes that held too much knowledge for someone so young. How do you respond when a child's simple honesty reveals a truth that adults spend their lives trying to hide? When 3 words spoken with innocent courage expose a reality that will change everything you thought you knew about your purpose? What you're about to discover isn't just about hunger or charity or celebrity activism, but about the moment when a child's vulnerability meets a champion's heart and creates a ripple effect that transforms an entire community. But what nobody knew was that this 7-year-old girl's confession would lead Caitlin to uncover a hidden crisis affecting thousands of children in her own backyard. And her response would become the most powerful example of what it means to use your platform for something bigger than yourself. Before we dive into this incredible story, let me know in the comments where you're watching from today. If you believe in the power of mentorship and life-changing connections, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories that will touch your heart and restore your faith in human goodness. Now, let's get into what really happened on that October afternoon that changed everything. The fluorescent lights hummed softly overhead in the Des Moines Community Center as Caitlin Clark stood before a group of about 50 children, their eager faces reflecting the warm glow of the basketball court where she had just finished demonstrating shooting techniques. The smell of fresh paint mixed with the lingering scent of the pizza lunch that had been served earlier, creating an atmosphere of celebration and possibility that filled the renovated gymnasium. Caitlin had come to the center as part of her foundation's outreach program, expecting to spend an hour talking about basketball fundamentals and the importance of education. Her voice echoed slightly in the large space as she wrapped up her presentation, the sound bouncing off the newly installed backboards that her foundation had donated just months earlier. "Does anyone have any questions about what we talked about today?" she asked, scanning the sea of raised hands with a smile. The children were sitting cross-legged on the polished wooden floor, their excitement palpable as they competed for her attention. She pointed to a boy in the front row who wanted to know about her favorite basketball move, then to a girl who asked about playing in college. The questions came fast and enthusiastic, each child eager to connect with their hero in this intimate setting that felt worlds away from the packed arenas where Caitlin usually found herself. But then, from the back of the group, a small hand slowly rose into the air. It belonged to Zara Johnson, a 7-year-old girl whose grandmother had brought her to the event after hearing about it at their local church. Zara's hair was neatly braided with colorful beads that caught the light as she moved, and her oversized t-shirt hung loose on her small frame, clearly a hand-me-down that had seen better days. "Yes, sweetheart?" Caitlin said, kneeling down to get closer to the children's eye level. "What's your question?" Zara looked around nervously at the other children, then back at Caitlin. Her voice was barely above a whisper when she spoke, but in the quiet gymnasium, every word carried with crystal clarity. "Miss Caitlin," she said, her small hands fidgeting with the hem of her shirt, "I don't have a question about basketball. I just wanted to tell you that I'm hungry." The simple statement hit the room like a thunderbolt. The other children fell silent, some looking confused, others nodding in recognition of a truth they understood all too well. The adults in the room, volunteers and community center staff, exchanged glances that spoke volumes about a reality they dealt with every day but rarely discussed so openly. Caitlin felt her heart stop for a moment as she processed what she had just heard. This wasn't a question about sports or school or dreams for the future. This was a 7-year-old girl in a room full of people, finding the courage to speak a truth that most adults would be too proud or too scared to admit. "You're hungry right now, sweetheart?" Caitlin asked gently, moving closer to Zara. The little girl nodded, her eyes beginning to fill with tears as she realized that everyone was now looking at her. "We didn't have breakfast this morning," Zara whispered, her voice cracking with the weight of a confession that felt too big for her small shoulders. "And yesterday we only had crackers for dinner because Grandma said we have to wait until her check comes." The gymnasium fell completely silent, except for the soft hum of the air conditioning and the distant sounds of traffic outside. Caitlin could feel the eyes of every adult in the room on her, waiting to see how she would respond to this moment of raw honesty from a child who had just laid her family's struggle bare in front of strangers. But what happened next would prove that some people are born to rise to moments like these, to transform individual pain into collective action, to turn a child's vulnerability into a community's strength. Caitlin stood up slowly, her mind racing as she processed not just what Zara had said, but what it represented. How many other children in this room were hungry? How many families in this community were struggling with food insecurity while she had been focused on basketball camps and shooting clinics? "Zara," she said, her voice steady but filled with emotion, "thank you for being brave enough to tell me that. That took a lot of courage, and I want you to know that you did the right thing by speaking up." She turned to address the entire group, her voice growing stronger as she found her footing in this unexpected moment. "How many other kids here are hungry right now?" she asked, and slowly, hesitantly, about a dozen small hands rose into the air. The sight of those raised hands hit Caitlin like a physical blow. These weren't statistics or news reports about childhood hunger. These were real children sitting in front of her, admitting to a need that should never exist in a country as wealthy as America. "Okay," she said, pulling out her phone with determination that surprised even herself. "Here's what we're going to do. I'm calling every restaurant in a 5-mile radius, and we're going to make sure every single one of you gets a hot meal right now. Not tomorrow, not next week, but right now." The children's faces lit up with a mixture of disbelief and hope as Caitlin began making phone calls. Within 30 minutes, delivery drivers were arriving at the community center with bags of food from local restaurants, all paid for by Caitlin's personal credit card without a second thought about the cost. But as she watched the children eat, Caitlin realized that this moment was about so much more than one meal. This was about a systemic problem that required a systemic solution, and she was in a unique position to do something about it. "Zara," she said, sitting down next to the little girl who was now happily eating a cheeseburger and fries, "you just taught me something really important. You taught me that sometimes the most important questions aren't about basketball at all." Over the next few weeks, Caitlin threw herself into understanding the scope of childhood hunger in her community. She met with food bank directors, social workers, and school administrators. She learned that 1 in 6 children in Iowa faced food insecurity, that many kids relied on school meals as their primary source of nutrition, and that weekends and school breaks were the hardest times for families struggling to put food on the table. But what she discovered next would transform her understanding of her own purpose and lead to one of the most impactful charitable initiatives in sports history. Working with the Caitlin Clark Foundation, she launched the No Child Hungry program, a comprehensive initiative that went far beyond traditional food drives. The program established permanent food pantries in community centers across Iowa, created weekend backpack programs that sent food home with children who qualified for free school meals, and partnered with local restaurants to provide emergency meal vouchers for families in crisis. But the most innovative part of the program was what Caitlin called Zara's Challenge. For every point she scored in a game, local businesses pledged to donate meals to hungry children. Fans could participate by pledging their own donations, creating a direct connection between Caitlin's performance on the court and meals for children in need. The program exploded beyond anyone's expectations. Within 6 months, it had raised over $300,000 and provided more than 100,000 meals to children across the Midwest. Other athletes began launching similar initiatives in their own communities, creating a nationwide movement that traced its origins back to one 7-year-old girl's courage to speak her truth. But the most powerful moment came a year later, when Caitlin returned to the same community center for the program's anniversary celebration. Zara was there, now 8 years old and noticeably healthier, her grandmother beaming with pride as she watched her granddaughter take the microphone. "Miss Caitlin," Zara said, her voice now strong and confident, "I want to thank you for listening to me when I was hungry, but I also want to tell you something else. I'm not hungry anymore, and neither are my friends, because you taught us that it's okay to ask for help when we need it." The room erupted in applause, but Caitlin found herself fighting back tears as she realized the full impact of what had started with 3 simple words from a brave little girl. "You know what I learned from Zara that day?" Caitlin said, taking the microphone back. I learned that sometimes the most important thing we can do as athletes, as public figures, as human beings, is not to have all the answers, but to listen when someone has the courage to tell us what the real questions are. She looked out at the crowd of children, families, and community leaders who had gathered to celebrate a program that had grown far beyond anything she had imagined. Zara didn't just tell me she was hungry. She reminded me that my platform isn't just about basketball. It's about using whatever influence I have to make sure that no child ever has to choose between speaking up about their needs and staying silent about their pain. As the celebration continued around them, Caitlin and Zara sat together on the gymnasium floor, sharing a piece of cake and talking about dreams for the future. But this time, those dreams weren't limited by hunger or uncertainty. They were as limitless as the courage of a 7-year-old girl who had changed the world by simply telling the truth. Because sometimes the most powerful moments in our lives don't come from our greatest victories or our most impressive achievements. They come from our willingness to listen when someone trusts us with their vulnerability, to act when action is needed, and to remember that true greatness isn't measured by the records we break, but by the lives we touch and the problems we solve along the way. And that day, as Zara Johnson finished her cake and ran off to play with her friends, she carried with her the knowledge that her voice mattered, that her needs were important, and that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is simply tell someone when you're hungry, because you never know who might be listening, and you never know how ready they might be to help.